Hello, hello.
Hello.
It's good to be back. I was going to say something different, and then I didn't. Just so you all understood that. Pause.
And I was gonna say something and then immediately got a headache. And then I was like, great. I'm dying.
It happens. That's very...
It'll go away.
That's very fitting for today's episode. Today, selfishly, I'm going to get excited because this is my birthday episode.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. I didn't get a birthday episode last year because I was busy.
Right.
I was having a baby. So
that was your birthday.
It was.
Reward.
It was my birthday gift from the universe. I got 7 layers of my body cut open.
Ew.
Yeah, I felt them pull apart my abdominal muscles.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
Kaitlyn.
so that was my birthday last year.
You could feel that?
Yeah. Not like...
Do you have any trauma around this?
No, it was actually a really great experience. It was... Let me know if you guys want an episode about C-sections. No, it was...
I will not be present.
No, it was crazy. But, yeah, that's how I was celebrating my birthday last year. So this year, I'm excited to get to do a birthday special. And what better topic to celebrate... Like, what better topic to say celebration than leprosy?
Leprosy.
I'm Kate.
And I'm Jane, and this is Creeps and Coffee.
A show where we talk about the dark parts of the world around us.
Cryptids, conspiracies, things that go bump in the night.
And the crimes behind the scariest creatures of all, humans.
Join us as we take a look at the stories sure to give you the creeps.
Pull up a seat, grab a coffee,
and let's have a chat.
Now, Kaitlyn, can I ask
Please.
a question?
Of course.
So, when I discovered the episode was going to release on your birthday,
Yes.
I said, girl, what do you want to talk about for your birthday?
Yes.
Why did you very excitedly say Leprosy Islands?
So,
or Islands?
That's a fantastic question, Jamie. Thank you for asking. So,
It all comes from my childhood.
Yes.
When I was little.
Historically speaking, for my birthday specials in the past, we have done some deep dives into my areas of hyperfixation, primarily discussing different things about the Titanic and Dyatlov Pass. 2 things for which I have a deep passion. I thought this year, to switch it up, let's do something that has held my attention for years. So I think we've mentioned previously that when it comes to episode topics, Jamie has this master list that we share of a Google Doc.
Yep.
I think there's probably... I'd say probably close to 100 topics on that list, if not more.
If not more.
Yeah.
Probably more.
I'm just really bad at guessing.
It's 26 pages long.
Oh, so this fuels my point. So I don't look at the document often. I think of those 26 pages, I have probably added 3 topics. And Leprosy Islands were the first thing I ever added. And I think very similarly to the last episode that I was on, I learned about this topic from a Facebook post. And I spent a good chunk of today trying to figure out how I was going to intro that without sounding like the Facebook mom I've been so afraid of becoming. But it was in one of my, like, crypto, like, other similar topic oh, I have the hiccups.
Terrible.
Other similar topic podcast groups. So it wasn't like out of the realm. It wasn't just a random post where I was like, oh, what is this? It was on like a discussion topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I read this post about this really unfortunate group of individuals who were horribly mistreated and brought to an island, separated from the rest of society, brought to an island based on the fact that society had deemed them completely diseased I mean, they were, in saying that they did have a disease, but that did not make them any lesser.
Yeah.
And this discussion post was talking about their ability to take a really shitty and really unfortunate situation that they were in and turn it into an uplifting community with a really strong history looking back on it now. And something about that really jumped out at me. I don't know what exactly. I see posts like that all the time, discussion posts talking about different subjects, and naturally having a show like this, Jamie and I talk about things like this quite a bit. So I really can't speak to what drew me to this topic so much, but it's one that I've been thinking about for a really, really long time. And so when Jamie, all of that to say, to come back to your original question, when you asked what I wanted to talk about, I thought...
I forgot I asked a question. Yeah. I was just listening.
My gut was saying that now was the time to talk about it. I think also, not to get political, but I think we're in a time now where there's a lot of divisiveness, and a topic like this, not necessarily leprosy, but this idea of segregating those who feel different or those who may have something else going on. I think that's a very relevant topic right now, unfortunately. So I think in order to not make the same mistakes in history, it's important to discuss things that have happened in the past. So, all that being said, we're going to talk about a lot of medical stuff. We're going to talk about some historical stuff, so buckle up. It is my birthday after all. But really, we're going to talk about some people and some really unfortunate circumstances in those people's lives. Obviously, we've got some ghost stories. We've got some creeps and coffee signature things that we're going to include with that. But like we do in a lot of, not necessarily true crime, but true stories, I want everybody to remember that there are real people involved in this. These aren't all legend. These are real cases in history, real circumstances. So bear that in mind as we discuss this. All that to say, let's jump in. And I think naturally the first place to start is by talking about leprosy in general, because Jamie and I were kind of saying before we started recording, like, leprosy is something, it's a disease that I think we have a very different perception of based on things like Leprosy Island and the things we'll talk about today. But it really isn't as scary as it's made out to be. I
feel like it's also very misunderstood.
That's the word I was looking for.
I've never heard of it. Like, I knew the word leprosy, and so people would go, ew, you're a leper, you're gross. Like, it was a very much, like, I didn't know what disease it was, I didn't know the symptoms, I just knew, like, the social connotation. Leprosy, leper, that was something icky, and I knew that the guy from the It movies was scared of diseases, and he saw a leper something. And so I didn't really know much about it. And it's not as scary as I thought, and now I feel bad.
So, I think that the term leprosy itself is very outdated. I think, again, it comes back to how it's been discussed in media with movies and stories like It. That's a really good example. But if you actually look at the history of the disease itself, which is now known as Hansen's disease, it's actually one of the oldest recorded diseases. There's references that appear in ancient Indian, Chinese, and Egyptian texts. I was reading that there's the earliest recording they believe was from India. But there's also, if you want to look at more, like, generally known, I guess you could say, there's also mention of it in the Bible. in Leviticus. I have no concept of the different parts of the Bible. My Catholic school teachers would be horrified. However, if that's something you know the relevance of, there you go. It's mentioned in Leviticus quite a bit.
I apologize. My immediate response when you brought up Catholic school or whatever was suck a fat one.
No, that's...
sorry, that...
valid.
An innate... something took hold of me and I had to get it out. I had to say it. It's not... You're not all bad, just like a lot of...
Just like most of them.
Just like a good amount.
Yeah. But if you want to talk about the biblical references specifically, many biblical references... Wow, let me try that one more time. Many biblical references were likely describing a wide range of skin diseases as we now know them, not just true leprosy. But if you think about ancient societies, they didn't have distinctions necessarily for all of those things. So people with visible skin conditions were often considered to be flat out ritually unclean. We know now, having dermatological science
Girl, I got
behind us,
eczema.
well, and that would have been unclean. So as a result, the isolation of people with these skin conditions would sometimes be more religiously driven rather than medical, because they thought there was some sort of negative spirit or evil demon that was taking over this person, and it was them coming through their skin. There was no understanding of what a bacterial infection was, because we didn't even know what bacteria was.
Yeah.
So we later would find out that the disease itself is caused by a Mycobacterium leprae, but that wouldn't be discovered until 1873 by a Norwegian physician named Gerhard Ormauer Hansen, which is why it's now called Hansen's disease. To give you kind of the Coles notes of the history and how leper colonies came to be. So all that to say, it's a skin disease, it's a skin condition. It can affect and does affect how you come across. It can be splotchy and red and almost look like a really bad case of eczema, which is funny that you bring up eczema. Or it can go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where it's affecting your limbs and your movements, and it can be really, really debilitating, and particularly in a time...
It can, like, deform your face.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you for taking that part of the brain cell. I really appreciate that.
It can also... I didn't know this. It can damage your nerve endings, but also that means you can't feel pain sometimes.
Absolutely.
And that was... first of all, I thought that was cool, because I was like, oh my god, it's just like the movie Kick-Ass. Like, you can go be a superhero and can't feel pain. It's cool. In reality, it's not good, because that means when people would, like, injure themselves, or if you're, say they get their arm caught in a door, or you break your finger, you don't feel the pain.
No, if you're in a particularly dangerous situation, you can't adjust things to get yourself out of that danger, because...
And you also can't feel if you're getting an infection.
Exactly.
You're more likely to get sick, that sort of thing.
Exactly. So
it's not as cool as I thought.
No.
It's not Novocaine.
No, it's not. But I appreciate that you took an immediately positive perspective on it. That's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be very debilitating. Now there's a fairly effective cure for it, to make it a lot less debilitating. But again, at a time when there was no understanding of what it was, how it was passed on, it invoked a lot of fear. And that's when we started to see leper colonies pop up. So leper colonies are also more accurately called leprosaria or lazarettos. And they were essentially communities where people with leprosy were isolated from the general population. And the history of these leper colonies is deeply tied to fear, it's tied to religion, and it's tied to a stigma in the name of public health. I think the misunderstanding and the assumption that being in the vicinity of someone with leprosy would pass that on to you. It was very, very much looked at as like a zombie disease, kind of, where like that would be passed,
Yes.
like a leper would bite you and you'd turn into one too. Like, these were just people with a disease who were struggling. Leprosy can be, leprosy can be passed on from person to person. That's how the bacteria is spread.
But not via pregnancy.
No, exactly. And also, it's not from standing in a general vicinity. You have to be incredibly...
It's not COVID.
It's not COVID. In a way, the only thing that I can liken it to is AIDS, where if you shake a leper's hand, you're not going to get leprosy. And I hate referring to them as lepers, so I catch myself doing it, because they are just people with leprosy. But you're not going to get it from being in the vicinity. But because this was the understanding,
big social stigma.
It led to a lot of social stigma, and it led to a lot of isolation, which is what we're going to kind of dive into. So leper colonies really, or leprosy itself, was really ramping up as a result of the slave trade, with slaves coming from West and East Africa, going into India, going into continental Europe. Like I said, the bacteria was originally, or believed to was believed to have originated in India. So as that's getting passed around, these slave trades are going on, bringing a vast number of individuals who could have been exposed to this into a more general population, you can say. And it really became widespread, particularly in Europe. So looking at medieval Europe, the Middle Ages, kind of between the year 1000 and 1500. Like we said, during the Middle Ages, leprosy was feared and it was poorly understood. And because skin conditions were largely seen as being divinely unclean or spiritually unclean, and that seeping through, it was sometimes viewed as divine punishment, where you had done something wrong, you had been a sinner, this was God punishing you. There were rituals that existed in which a person diagnosed with leprosy would symbolically be declared dead to society. And then they would then become a leper and not a person, and were forced to live out their life completely segregated. And as a result of this, across medieval Europe, there were thousands of leprosaria that were established. So these are these leper colonies where they're completely segregated. So, for example, England had hundreds by the 12th century. Paris alone, just the city, not even counting the rest of France, reportedly had multiple leper hospitals. Think of it as, like, obviously very different again, because tuberculosis was a very different experience, but think of it as like the sanitarium. You had tuberculosis, you were segregated to this place. Sure, there it was to get better. In terms of leprosaria, it was to be isolated there for the rest of your days.
Well, it's so infectious, they had no idea what to do.
Exactly.
Like, that, the way we felt about COVID is like, it's in the air, it's everywhere,
Exactly.
You're gonna catch it. They were scared like that.
Exactly. So...
apparently people still get leprosy, no?
Yes, absolutely they do. They get Hansen's disease, and it's curable. Well, not entirely curable, but it's treatable.
True.
So these residents with leprosy, they would live in segregated communities, often, to no one's surprise, talking about Catholic school, they were often supported by church donations. Contrary to popular belief, they were not all bad. Some leprosaria were relatively well organized and charitable, but residents were socially cut off. So regardless of the good intent of these places, you're still completely segregating this group of people. By the late Middle Ages, leprosy declined very sharply in Europe, which was likely due to changes in immunity, the same way that we're dealing with COVID now. Lots of people have a higher immunity to it. It's not affecting us as significantly because our systems are adjusting. The living conditions in Europe were changing, and there was now competition with things like tuberculosis. These diseases were kind of taking over each other's hierarchy, and many leper houses and leper hospitals closed. If we look globally, though, so that's just Europe. Leprosy never disappeared globally.
As I say, apparently India is still like the most leading
so
in cases to this day.
think about colonization. During European colonial expansion, isolation colonies were established where the people who were natives to the area were pushed out by the colonizers coming in. They didn't want to deal with disease. They said, get out of our way. You go over here, deal with your sickness. We'll make things better here. And I say better in quotations. Obviously, we know that they were not making things better. But that was their perspective, right? So isolation colonies were popping up in Asia, in Africa, in the Pacific, in the Americas. And some of the most well-known examples come out of Hawaii, South Africa, Japan. So the one we're going to talk the most about today probably is one of the more widely recognized ones, and that's Kalaupapa. I'm so sorry, Hawaii, because that's definitely...
Sounded good to me.
Yeah. That's as close as...
That doesn't mean anything.
No. But Kalaupapa was the original colony that I looked into. That's what sparked my interest in this. So it was established in 1866 by the Kingdom of Hawaii. And patients were not encouraged to go here. They were forcibly exiled to an island. This wasn't just a case of being sent off to a hospital. These people were transported to a place in the middle of the water where they could not leave and forcibly kept there. A Catholic priest named Father Damien became famous for living among these patients and advocating for them, which I kind of referenced before and we'll get more into. But isolation there, this is not a, like, oh, this was all medieval Europe. Isolation in Kalaupapa lasted until 1969.
Yep.
That's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So
the thing I was reading said, like, they still have an active postal office there. Like,
yeah, there's still residents there now.
Yep.
Just to briefly touch on Robben Island in South Africa. Robben Island it held the prison, most famously, if you've heard of Robben Island, it held the prison where Nelson Mandela was held. But long before that, it housed a leper colony in the 19th century. And patients here endured harsh conditions and strict segregation. Again, they're not making a great case for themselves. And then if we look at Japan, Japan has some of the other most famous ones. Japan maintained really strict leprosy segregation policies into the 20th century. Patients were forcibly institutionalized under the 1907 leprosy prevention law, and these policies weren't fully repealed until 1996. It was 3 years before Jamie and I were born. They were still actively segregating these people. Unfortunately, I feel like Asia does have really strict laws when it comes to these things. I mean, if you even think, I know Japan and China are very different, but if you even think about the Chinese law about how many children you can have, like there's a very strict sense of government control.
I know the Philippines had a big leper colony.
Absolutely.
As well. One of the biggest, like thousands of people.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if we think about what the turning point was, it was modern medicine. Everything changed in the 20th century. In 1873, Hansen identified the exact bacterium that was causing leprosy. It wouldn't be until the 1940s, so about 70 years later, where the first effective treatment would appear. But still, that's a huge improvement. And then by the 1980s, multi-drug therapy becomes the standard. for treatment of Hansen's disease, which is now curable, only mildly contagious, and really, really difficult to transmit. It requires prolonged close contact. And you're probably not that close to anybody all the time.
Yeah.
And because of effective treatment and modern medicine, forced isolation is no longer medically necessary. And it should never have been socially expected.
You're more likely to just wither away and die in isolation. You can go and get treatment now.
Exactly. But even after medical advances, that stigma really, really persisted. And people with leprosy were denied marriage. They were denied employment. They were denied voting rights because, like I said, a lot of these ritualistic things declared them as dead. They weren't people. They were lepers. Some countries only recently issued formal apologies. Some still haven't. And going back to the Kalaupapa in Hawaii, survivors of the colonies still live there.
Yep.
They said, fuck you guys. You left us here. We made a life for ourselves. We don't want to come back to the mainland because you guys suck. And I don't blame them.
That's what I was going to add, too, is, like, it started off as, like, you need to leave. Like, this is, like, you guys are gross. And they took these really terrible circumstances and turned it into, like, a safe space, a community, a refuge.
Exactly.
I wish I didn't have to, but I'm glad that they do still have that community bond.
Absolutely.
Forged in fire.
I will point out again, the term leper itself is obviously very stigmatizing. And when I use it, I want to use it to show that stigmatization. I absolutely do not want to refer to anyone with Hansen's disease as a leper. But if you hear me using that term, just know that I want to acknowledge the stigma behind it. And I am actively trying to not use that language. But moving even more forward in time to today, like Jamie said, leprosy still exists. There's around 200,000 new cases worldwide. Like Jamie also said, primarily in parts of India. Brazil has a really high population. Indonesia has a really high population. But modern treatment prevents disability if it's caught early enough. You can be okay.
See, my anxious part of my brain, when I was looking at leprosy itself, and it said it could develop between 1 and 5 years, but could go as long as 20 years, I was like, I have it.
I was going to say...
I have it, and I'm in the early stages.
I think a lot of the reason we didn't do this episode earlier was because I was worried you were going to diagnose yourself with leprosy.
I'm trying really hard not to.
And I appreciate that.
But
I appreciate that. I know how hard that is.
Well, because, listen, I was reading the thingies. I got them here right now. Destruction of nasal cartilage. My nose is messed up. Erectile dysfunction. My penor is flat. Loss of sensation in fingers and toes. If I think about it hard enough, I can't feel them anymore. Muscle weakness. I feel weak. Reddish skin. My skin is red. Some of that was a joke. Some of it I am like, wait, I'm scared.
The only one of that was a joke is the erectile dysfunction.
Correct. Yeah.
She is a raging boner all the time.
I'm gonna wake up paralyzed and it's gonna be leprosy. Where would I have caught it? I don't know.
Medieval Europe.
Do I have any proof? No. Did all of my doctor tests come out fine last time I went besides having hives? Yeah.
Oh, God.
I need iron.
Same. Wow. Let's talk about daily life in these leper colonies. So,
okay.
Obviously, daily life in leprosaria were very different depending on the era and depending on the location. But almost always, it involved a sense of routine, there was an aspect of religion, there was work, and there was isolation. So if you think about medieval Europe and their leprosaria, in places like Paris, France in general, but across England, leprosaria were usually small communities outside city walls, not entirely separated like an island, but they were encouraged or exiled to outside city limits. So residents would have small individual rooms, or they would have shared dormitories. The buildings wouldn't be houses or like apartment complexes. They were like, there was a chapel, there would be a dining hall, there would be an infirmary, and there would be the sleeping quarters. Like I said before, a lot of these colonies were funded by church donations or by wealthy patrons who had some sort of connection to it where they wanted to donate their money. And it was really, in medieval Europe, just like a lot of other aspects, it was religion that structured the day. So the residents would attend a daily mass. A lot of them would undergo a ritual similar to a funeral for themselves when they were first admitted, when they would then become symbolically dead to society. And prayer and repentance were emphasized because, like I said, leprosy was often seen as a divine punishment. So the more you repented, the more likely it was to, quote-unquote, heal you. Which, obviously...
This is such a social disease. Like,
exactly.
It's got so much social context. It's crazy.
I'm going to point out...
Jamie's a genius.
No. I'm going to read off some of these rules and restrictions that would happen. I want you to tell me what it sounds like.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Residents of Leprosaria often had to wear identifying clothing. In some regions, they were required to carry a bell or a clapper when they were outside to warn others that they were in the vicinity. And many were technically forbidden from entering the towns. Enforcement would vary depending on the town, obviously, but what does that sound like to you?
I don't know if it's the answer you're looking for, but it kind of feels like Germany.
This is the exact answer I was looking for. It sounds a little bit like the Holocaust.
As soon as you said the wear certain things, I was like, oh.
Exactly.
Oh. Right.
Just saying. Leprosaria in medieval Europe were technically designed to be self-sufficient because no one in the town would want to service the leprosaria, and they didn't want them coming into town. However, the disfigurements that would come from untreated cases of leprosy, especially at the time when it really wasn't understood, it really varied how physically able the residents were able to help with things. But if they were physically able, residents were allowed to farm, they tended gardens, they raised animals, they crafted their own goods. So, I mean, it really depended on the individual and the colony itself. Looking at more of the 19th century colonies, which is funny because thinking about it now, if I think of medieval Europe, I think of a lot more like torture and terrible things. But really, it was a sense of like, get out of here, do your own thing, we'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. Whereas,
you've been evicted.
Exactly. Which...
You have been voted off the villa, please leave. Pack your luggage and go. Sorry.
Get your eggs out of that one basket, get out of here.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's also something that happened in general across medieval Europe for a lot of reasons. It wasn't just sickness or disease. Sometimes I think about Dante, and while he was writing...
And his Inferno.
While he was writing about his Inferno...
he was banished?
He was exiled from a bunch of places. Just because he was a shithead.
I didn't know this.
No, absolutely.
Well...
So, like it...
They don't call it Dante's Inferno for no reason.
He was just traveling around. He was exiled from Verona.
Dante! Brother, we gotta talk.
But, like, that was...
Love your work.
That's kind of just what they did, right? There was no real way to enforce it. They were just like, get out of here. Whereas, if you look at things like state-run exile colonies in, like, the 19th century, like Kalaupapa, life could be a lot harsher because there was a lot more force being used. So in Hawaii, people were forcibly transported by boat and permanently separated from their family. There was no goodbyes. There was no pack up your stuff. It was once you were sent to Kalaupapa, you weren't leaving. That your life was there now, and you were dead to the rest of the world. The reality of it is, in those circumstances, this was before antibiotics. So not only are these people alone, forcibly exiled, they're trying to build a life on this island that they've been thrown to. Progressive nerve damage was causing a loss of sensation. Injuries, because of this, injuries were unnoticed. They'd become infected. Amputations were really common. And it also targets the optic nerve, so blindness was occurring. So these people are now life-alteringly disabled. It's not just, oh, I feel kind of sick all the time or my skin's itchy. These people are going blind. They're losing their limbs. They're losing feeling.
Yep.
And they are alone. Without anyone that they know. Yes, Jamie, you have your hand raised.
Let me put it down. I also wanted to mention that while we're on that sort of like vein, some of them were trying to heal themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they don't have any medical experience, they were doing things that could be dangerous. At one point, they were being told to take mercury because it was supposed to help. Hey girl, don't ingest mercury.
It's like,
do not do that.
Not to bring up COVID again, but let's talk about fucking...
The bleach?
Drink bleach, take horse tranquilizer, take whatever.
Yeah.
That's gonna get rid of it.
So, well, people, nobody knew, so they were, like, forced to have to try these inhumane things just to see if it would help.
Well, so...
And I think that sucks, too.
Speaking of inhumane things, and...
You lose a little bit of humanity every time you eat mercury.
Looking at one of the different colonies, kind of looking at Japan again, Japan enforced those strict laws and rules for a long time, and when I say strict, they were very strict. Mm-hmm. They had regimented schedules within these leprosaria. There was, in a lot of the facilities, there was gender segregation. So not only were you separated, if you and your partner, let's say somehow, you both got Hansen's disease, you were separated, it didn't matter. So there was no camaraderie in that sense. And as a really dark chapter in this, there was a lot of forced sterilizations because there was no research being done into whether or not leprosy could be passed on genetically. So a lot of these residents lost their ability to be individuals, and they were forced to stay inside basically until they actually died, not just socially.
Yeah.
All that to say that the isolation was painful, and there's no doubt about that. But what's so intriguing about this is that really strong internal cultures developed. And I can't speak to the experience, but I would say that the hardest part of it would have been not the disease, but separation from your loved ones, a social stigma around everything you do, a loss of identity completely. But what's so inspiring is that a lot of these survivor accounts don't even talk about that. They talk about resilience and humor and joy that they fostered within the community. And I think that's really something. I think that's a really huge deal.
Yeah.
Particularly when talking about Kalaupapa, we look at it as one of the most well-documented examples of forced medical exile, especially in modern history. So looking at it specifically, Kalaupapa sits on a remote peninsula on the island of Molokai, which is obviously surrounded by ocean. That's how islands work. Good job, Kaitlyn. Good explanation.
Geography.
And the isolation of it is exactly why it was chosen. People weren't going there.
People can visit now.
Hey, absolutely. So,
which I think is interesting. They have like a sorry if you were gonna say this, but I know that they have a national park and like a trail that you can go on. But to go there, you need a sponsor who's from there or can like vouch for you if you're a tourist. Or I think it's like you can only have like 100 people can go there a day.
Yeah.
Which honestly, I feel like that's how tourism should be.
I agree.
If you want to protect like special spots or like nature,
I
like
wholeheartedly agree.
Get stricter.
Yeah, so by the mid 1800s, around the 1860s, this is when leprosy really began to spread in the Hawaiian Kingdom specifically. Again, this is likely introduced through increased global contact and trade. More so trade of slaves than anything else, but there's also other trades going on. I'm not blind to that fact. But with there being no cure and with there being even more widespread fear growing day by day, the king at the time, I'm going to butcher his name so hard, and I practiced it. King Kamehameha V signed the 1865 Act to Prevent the Spread of Leprosy. So beginning...
Better than I would have done.
Thank you. So beginning in 1866, people who were formally diagnosed with leprosy were forcibly removed from their families. They were transported by ship to Kalaupapa, and most were never allowed to return home. And in the years that it was open as a leprosaria, so that would be 1866 to 1969, over 8,000 people were sent there, which is huge. The early conditions were they were harsh, they were chaotic, they were extremely difficult because there was little shelter, there was little, if any, medical care. Supplies were inconsistent, it depended on when they had a new load of people to bring in. Some patients were basically just thrown off the boat and left on shore to fend for themselves. And due to a lack of oversight, there was a lot of alcohol smuggling and violence that was reported in the first few years because people didn't know how to adjust. They didn't know what was going on. And it wasn't treatment like the king was saying. It was exile.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be until 1873 when there was a shred of hope that would come to Kalaupapa. And I hesitate in describing it that way because I don't want to make it feel as though the introduction of this Catholic priest is what fixed this island, because that's not what I'm saying whatsoever.
We will never say, you will never catch us saying that.
Exactly.
The white man was the savior.
Exactly. But I do think it's important to mention that a missionary priest named Father Damien arrived on the island, and he chose to live permanently among the patients. He wasn't just this white man who came in with a savior complex, although I'm sure that was part of it, but he himself helped build homes. He helped build churches. He helped hand-make coffins for people. He helped organize farms and clean water systems. He advocated publicly for better conditions, which is the hugest part, because I think, well, it's important to mention that obviously these patients were advocating for themselves and they were screaming for better living conditions and more support from the kingdom and from the public. They were the ones that were exiled. The public wasn't going to listen to them. Who does the public historically listen to? The white man savior. And he was willing to take on that role and use his... What's the word I'm looking for?
Power?
Use his power, use his...
Influence?
His influence, his...
I know you're looking for the word, and I can't think of it. Social standing.
His,
Privilege?
That's the word. He was able to use his privilege to actually make a difference. And I think that's a huge thing. Unfortunately, his closeness to these individuals and to the circumstances he was surrounded by, he eventually contracted the disease himself. and Father Damien died in 1889. He later became Saint Damien, and he remains a central figure in Kalaupapa story. He was a huge aspect of it. So again, while I don't mean to make it seem like he's the only reason, he used that privilege, recognized the privilege that he had, and actively used it to try and help how he could. Another key figure was Mother Marianne Cope, who arrived in 1883 with other sisters to care specifically for the women and girls. She also chose to live the rest of her life there. So there's less of a history about her, but I also felt it was important to mention that she did specifically come to help with them. So despite the tragedy and despite everything that was going on, the residents created a functioning town. It was, by the early 1900s, it had churches, it had schools, it had stores, it had bands, it had choirs and brass bands. They had baseball teams. They had social clubs. I'm
also glad that some people, even back then, were able to separate the stigma of the two and wanted to help anyway, because, like, sick people aren't always beautiful. No. Like, yeah, nurses and doctors and stuff have to see so many scary things. And before you change your topic too much, I want to say two things. Yeah. One, humans are the scariest of them all. Like, damn, we really banished y'all. And two, with the not getting a whole lot of help even after being banished, the quote of, every time you think, oh, the government wouldn't do that. Yes, they would. And that was all I had to say about that.
Absolutely would.
Continue.
People were getting married. They were forming deep friendships. They were realizing that if everybody else was going to be fucking assholes, they could thrive within themselves. And a lot of individuals on Kalaupapa described it as a place of sorrow and solidarity, which I think is huge.
Yes.
Whoa. In 1969, following specifically the treatment of Hansen's disease with sulfone drugs like dapsone, and multi-drug therapy, making it fully curable, the mandatory isolation officially ended. And Hawaii said, patients are free to leave. You can come back. A lot of people chose to stay. I'd say most of them chose to stay because Kalaupapa had become their home. And the outside world was not ready to welcome them home with open arms. They were still carrying the stigma. One of the most painful aspects of it, from my perspective now as a mother, is parents were being separated from their children. And healthy children that were born in Kalaupapa were removed from their families and sent elsewhere.
No.
Siblings were they lost contact forever because their siblings were stolen.
I didn't know that.
And
that's really sad.
For many Native Hawaiians, I think a history like this represents not just an obvious medical tragedy, but that aspect of colonial injustice that, like Jamie said, Kalaupapa is now part of a National Park Service. It's now considered Kalaupapa National Historic Park. Access is very restricted to preserve the privacy and respect of those that still live there, because a small number of former patients still live there voluntarily. 1969 was not that long ago.
Yeah.
There's people still alive. But there is much more of that history being taught.
Okay, while Kaitlyn is having a brief baby break, I wanted to talk. I'm going to jump in and hop on my soapbox, and I just wanted to go over a couple of different things. Notable cases of leprosy I thought was interesting. You've got Dimple Kapadia, an Indian actress who was diagnosed with leprosy before shooting a musical in 1973, but she later recovered and went on to have a completely successful acting career, and I believe she's still alive to this day. You have Josefina Guerrero, who was a Filipino World War II spy who used the fear of her leprosy to listen in on battle plans and deliver the information. And I thought that was really interesting. You've got supposedly, possibly, hypothetically, Henry IV of England and the Catholic King of Latin Jerusalem, also known as the Leper King. And I will throw in a bit of etymology, even if Kaitlyn won't. The word leprosy comes from the Greek word lepos, or skin, and lepros, which means scaly man. And they had lots of different words, or like names for Leprosy Islands. They had leprosaria, lazarets, lazarettos, lazaretas, leprosy villages, lazar houses, or leprosariums, or leprosariums, depending on where you were from. And yeah, there was also an order of Saint Lazarus, which was established to care for lepers in the Crusader state of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. I believe it was during the 1100s, so like 1130s. Yeah, there was the Order of St. Lazarus of Jerusalem, also known as the Leper Brothers of Jerusalem, or simply the Lazarites, which was a Catholic military order founded by Crusaders during that time at a leper hospital in Jerusalem. And that I just thought was an interesting little bit of history. There's also lots of political aspects I feel like that we could get into, but we're not a political... Well, everything is political, but we don't need to get into it, but I guess we've been getting into it. Anyway, lots of political aspects about illness as a whole. Medicine is political, whether you want it to be or not, depending on where you are in the world. You have certain access to different types of medicine. Medicine is also very cultural. And illness, diseases are political, cultural. It's very interesting, very anthropological. I won't get too far into it. I'll shut up now. But it's also been portrayed in media a lot, which I think I was talking about with the It case, or the It movie. It's been in a lot of novels, a lot of old books, and the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, My Journey with Leprosy, a memoir by, I think, Jose P. Ramirez from 2009, Squint. Lots of different ones like that. There are also lots of infected animals, which is interesting. Apparently, between 15 and 20% of 9-banded armadillos in south-central United States carry the, disease for leprosy, the bacterium or whatever, the M. leprae, as a result of their low body temperature, which, watch out for them armadillos then. But there is also stigma surrounding armadillos and the fact that they do carry, leprosy. I believe chimpanzees can also get it, and other, mammals like chimpanzees, which is quite human-like if we're really gonna get into it. But, yeah. Anyway, back to my co-host, Kaitlyn. Go ahead, continue your rant.
Okay, so that's kind of the rundown on the genuine history of Kalaupapa. Obviously, we could go into a lot more, but there are others that I want to talk about, and there's obviously a very emotional connotation to discussing the more in-depth aspects, and I don't think, right now at least, that it's our place to comment on the experiences of those individuals. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is one aspect that does attract a lot of individuals to this topic, and obviously we're a paranormal podcast. This is the paranormal aspects of stories are always kind of at the forefront of our minds.
Always.
This circumstance is no different. And with a history as dark and as rich as Kalaupapa has, it's no surprise that there's ghost stories that grew around it. To be very clear, also very similar to Bidston Hill, ironically enough, there's no verified quote-unquote paranormal experiences. There's no specific this ghost doing this. There's no historical data to back up a lot of these stories, but a lot of longtime residents, park workers, and visitors have had these eerie experiences over the years and have been willing to share them. And I think those are very interesting. Because Kalaupapa is isolated, it's very quiet, it's layered with grief. The atmosphere generally does a lot of the storytelling on its own. And I think a big part of that is the cliffs. So if you think about the island itself as having like 4 sides, I guess that's how directions work. There's a north, a south, an east, and a west part of the island.
Sure.
Along 3 sides, it's obviously just open water. And then from one side, you can see really big cliff sides from Molokai, the original island where a lot of these people came from. So the cliffside apparitions are a really poignant part of Kalaupapa's story and the paranormal side of things. So along the base of the sea cliffs of Molokai, a lot of people have reported seeing figures standing near the shoreline at dusk, especially near the old landing sites where people were first dropped off by the boats. Some people will talk about a lone figure in white standing near the water. People will talk about just general shapes that seem to vanish when they're approached. One thing that's really common is the sensation of being watched while walking alone, particularly at sunset. Not necessarily seeing anything, but feeling like you're not alone.
Awesome.
Skeptics will point to mist from the ocean spray, shifting light bouncing off the water, whatever the case may be. Those things are constant there. That's absolutely something that should be noted, is that you're on an island. You're along a shore. I'm not going to say the ocean doesn't exist and that reflections don't come off the water. I'm not that hard of a ghosts are real. But you also have to realize that even if it's not necessarily a ghost, the amount of energy that would have come off that shoreline, particularly when people were being dropped off by the boats, it's really not all that convoluted to think that at the very least there's a heavy energy there.
Yeah.
Another thing that people talk about and people have reported is the sound of a bell. So I mentioned earlier that in medieval Europe, people with leprosy were sometimes required to carry bells or a noisemaker of some sort to identify themselves. It's important to point out, in Hawaii, people didn't follow that custom. There would be no need, especially on the island of Kalaupapa, where everyone there has leprosy. Everyone has been exiled. There's no need to warn...
So why would they hear a bell?
Well, that's the thing. There would be no need to warn others. But still, there are occasional stories of hearing a faint bell late at night, of metallic clinks coming from near cemetery areas specifically, with no visible source.
The plot thickens.
Most likely, and I hate to be the skeptic in this one, but because... Jamie's rolling her eyes at me. Because there is no history of this, in this particular area, I think it's probably livestock, like cowbells.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I still wanted to note it because the symbolism of it gives the story a lot of weight. People are able to, at the very least, attach that aspect to a different part of history. And it keeps the conversation going. So even if it's not necessarily something paranormal or supernatural coming from that area... Jamie's yawning.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
But even if it's not coming from that particular period, it's still a relevant part of the history of these leprosarias. And I think that's kind of an interesting connection to be made. Yeah. What is freaky, however, are the cemetery lights. So...
I don't know about these.
Kalaupapa, obviously, they developed their own place of living. And that also means that there's people dying. Particularly when you are dealing with a disease before the disease has a cure. So Kalaupapa has hundreds of graves And a lot of them are unmarked because at the time there was no opportunity to do that. So some residents have described flickers of light coming from burial grounds, what looks almost like lantern glow moving between headstones. And what I really was touched by was the scent of plumeria flowers, where none are planted.
Oh.
Kind of this idea that, like, the island is giving back and acknowledging that these graves are there without there being the flower present, if that makes sense. Obviously, these accounts are anecdotal. I roll again. If you want to think about it, it could be distant headlights. It could be phosphorescence. It could be imagination being amplified by isolation. That's a big explanation that a lot of people will give, is if you're alone and looking at something long enough, your brain is going to start to come up with something. But when people talk about these, it's further stigmatized. They've already got the stigma of leprosy. But they're telling these stories in hushed tones. They're not openly saying, oh, I see these lights all the time. They're acknowledging there's something to this that feels supernatural. You know what I mean? Perhaps most obvious in terms of ghostly encounters or spookiness in the island is the abandoned hospital. Old medical buildings are freaky. Modern medical buildings are freaky. Actually, prime example of that is the old hospital we drove past in New Orleans.
Ugh.
One of the most terrifying buildings I've ever laid eyes on.
And we didn't even go in it.
No, but just the vibe that was emanating from the abandoned portion of that hospital.
Bad.
Insane. So, this hospital is not an exception to that. The hospital has been preserved now by the National Park Service. So there's park workers that go in and check it out, even though it's no longer a functional hospital. But park workers have reported doors opening in heavy wind, which is
cool.
That's like, it's frequent there. There's a lot of wind. It's an aging structure. That's going to happen. But if it makes them, it goes back to, if it makes them feel like it's something more, that they're even mentioning it, maybe there is something more to it. Objects being shifted, that I don't mean to laugh, but a little bit. They talk about echoes in empty hallways. That's how echoes work. So
crazy.
Do I give a lot of credence to that one? Not necessarily. I think this one has a lot of natural explanations. You're on an island in Hawaii. There's a lot of storms. There's a lot of wind. It's an aging structure. None of these things are very surprising. But again, when you know that thousands of people suffered in that spot, it's very easy for your mind to fill in the gap.
That is
and
true.
give it that explanation. What I thought was really, really important to mention, particularly because I think Hawaii has such an interesting spiritual and cultural connection, I guess. They have such a strong identity in the Hawaiian culture. I did want to make the connection to part of their cultural beliefs and give it some Hawaiian spiritual context. So, traditional Hawaiian beliefs include spirits that are known as, I practice this one too. Oh my god. Those 2 weeks I spent in Hawaii when I was 7 are really, they're not coming back to me.
It would be better than what I do, so.
The traditional Hawaiian belief includes spirits known as uhane, or souls, and I'm not even gonna, Huakai Po, night marchers.
Ooh, okay.
Though Kalaupapa is not specifically famous for night marcher legends, it's still something to be said. because so many people died there and in such tragic circumstances, some locals believe that the land holds a sort of spiritual memory. And certain areas feel what they call kapu, or sacred and restricted, which again, we mentioned that access to the island is very limited. This is why. Visitors who are granted that access should show a deep respect, or they risk spiritual imbalance. They risk that negative energy coming back on them. So yeah, I think the Hawaiian belief that there are these souls that can walk amongst the living and take that opportunity at night to rejoin the world, I think is very significant to the background of Kalaupapa.
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to note that most of the former residents themselves have discouraged sensationalizing the place as haunted. They want people to show remembrance for what happened and the circumstances that were presented over fear of it being this grievous and haunted and dark place. So, I mean, the reality is that what lingers most about Kalaupapa and about everything that went on for these individuals, it's not a ghost story that lingers the most. It's not the haunted aspect. It's not the potential paranormal outcomes.
You're about to drop something poetic.
I am. It's this knowledge that thousands of people stood in the exact spot where any visitor would and looked back at a world that they would never see again. And I think that if we're going to talk about a haunting, I think that's the most haunting thought to come out of it, is that they were just left to their own devices and forgotten as real people.
That's so sad.
I know. But again, I think what is important to remember is that the people who lived their lives there and still continue to live their lives there were resilient. Yeah. They took a really shit situation. There's no other way. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was a shit situation. And they were still able to turn their lives into something that they felt was worth living and something that they felt meaningful about and were able to create this sense of community where they felt okay again. And for all the shit that the rest of the world gave them and the way that they were let down by the rest of society, they were still able to find peace and find solace and find comfort and friendships and love and rebuild what those original people tried to take from them.
Random connection. It kind of reminds me of Girl Interrupted. Did you ever watch that?
That feels vaguely familiar.
It's got Winona Ryder, Angelina Jolie from 99. I watched it recently, and I found that in it, because they're all in like a mental hospital, and all of the women in the women's ward all have their own problems, and sometimes they don't really get along, and there's issues.
That's just women.
But in the end, they're all part of this community where everyone else thinks they're crazy, but they all sort of understand each other, and they form this like connection. Because spoiler alert for a movie that came out 27 years ago, one of them kills themselves.
Happened.
And it's correct. Oops. Sadly.
Oops.
But in that, they all like bond and are there for each other in a way that their families, their friends, and even the like nurses and stuff, they can't be. And I think that's beautiful. And I was like, maybe in a past life I was one of these women in a psych ward.
No comment.
Like 200 years ago.
No comment.
And then I was a housewife on Quaaludes in the 50s, and now I'm here.
That's me right now.
A housewife on Quaaludes? Yeah. Right. Continue.
When we were doing this research, like I said, Kalaupapa was what drew me to the subject. But in doing more research in it, Jamie and I both discovered that this hit closer to home than we really thought it did. And
yeah,
it's not a problem on the other side of the world. It wasn't just wow, they were so messed up, they did this. or not a problem that we could pass on to a different country, because like most things that Canada likes to sweep under the rug, we also had a significant problem in doing this.
Yeah.
And I think it's important as Canadians, as Canadian podcasters with a platform talking about genuine history, I think it's really important that we acknowledge when we've fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're finally starting to talk about residential schools, which is...
Only took us way too long.
There's a whole other shit show of Canada being awful.
Yeah.
But Canada also had several leprosy hospitals. And the most historically significant, and often described as the most atmospheric, was on the East Coast. So we're going to talk about two really not far from where Jamie and I grew up, which was wild to think. So I want to start off by talking about a place called Tracadie. So Tracadie is in New Brunswick, and Tracadie really became the center of Canada's response to leprosy in the 19th century. So if we go back to the 1840s, obviously Canada joined in on this trend a little late in the game. But that's because,
as usual,
we didn't exist during medieval Europe. Obviously, just that being said, obviously there were Indigenous people here, but it was not Canada as we know it. As
it had not been colonized.
Exactly, it was not a colonized country. So...
It was a free country, and then we colonized
Precisely.
it. Way to go, white people.
Precisely. So 1840s, leprosy appeared in New Brunswick in the early 1800s, especially among Acadian communities. So a really quick rundown. The Acadians were a French crew that settled along the east coasts of Canada, the U.S. They were sent on their way a few different times and kind of dispersed, and there's a large group of Acadian ancestry in Maine. There's a large group along the east coast of Canada in the Maritimes. And also, I believe I was talking to Jamie about this, but the Cajun people in New Orleans, and I mean the whole Cajun crew, but specifically I say New Orleans because that's where Jamie and I have been. They are descendants of Acadians.
Right.
So, quick, you want to talk about etymology? I'll fucking talk about this.
Okay.
Acadian was pronounced Acadian, which was shortened to Cajun, which was then anglicized into Cajun.
Oh. You've definitely told me that and I didn't remember.
I saw that. I, found that out the other day, or, a couple weeks ago, and I went down a spiral because I was like, yeah. But anyway, that's my tangent on that. But because the Acadian communities were also being displaced and also interacting with such vast numbers of different people, is the same thing as everywhere else. The higher interaction with other people who carried the same bacterium, the higher the likelihood that they were going to catch it. And then as they're expanding and being pushed out and settling in these different areas, they're bringing it wherever they're going. So by 1844, the New Brunswick government established what's called a lazaretto, which is just another version of a leprosaria, so a leper hospital, near Tracadie. So, again, important context for this time, as a reminder, doctors didn't know how leprosy spread. They had no idea what was going on. Mm-hmm. The fear in the surrounding communities was intense, and some patients were being pressured, less pressured and more legally compelled to isolate. So unlike Kalaupapa, Tracadie wasn't as geographically cut off. They weren't sent off to an island, but it was socially isolating. It was more intense than the medieval European idea of just putting them outside of city limits. they were still being completely socially isolated into these lazarettos. So the hospital was largely run by what was called the Religious Hospitallers of St. Joseph, to no surprise, a Catholic nursing order. A key figure in this was a woman named St. Jean. I'm going to say this in the most New Brunswick way possible. St. Jean Jugan. She was not directly tied to tragedy, but the sisters there followed a similar charitable model to what she did. And it's a very common confusion because they followed kind of a model of her, but she, again, was not directly involved. But more directly connected was St. Marguerite de Youville. The most Acadian names. And her St. Marguerite's broader nursing tradition in Canada, which was kind of the major influence on Catholic hospital care in Canada at the time. So these sisters, these nuns, were living alongside the patients. They were providing what little medical care they could, given their limited knowledge, more spiritual care than anything else. And they helped sort of establish some structure and some routine. Life was obviously quieter and more institutional than Hawaii's exile settlement. And I think it's a big juxtaposition because as much as they are not alone on an island, Canada's climate is harsh. And I think it's very difficult for people who, particularly people who don't even live on the East Coast, to understand what an East Coast winter is like. And the heaviness of the snow, the grayness of being close to the water and the snow. Like, it's just
cold, wet,
it's just
windy,
dreary. So winter in these hospitals was another layer of isolation because you're not even getting out to go for walks. You're not getting that fresh ocean breeze. You're by the water, but the water's not a place that's safe or enjoyable at this point. And the snow was completely cutting off the hospital from anything else. So these people were living in hospital wards rather than like a village-style town like in Kalaupapa. They were following strict daily schedules that were set up by these nuns. They were encouraged, if not forced, to participate in prayer and mass. And if they were able, again, depending on physical disability based on the bacteria, they did light work if they were able. So they did laundry, they helped in the kitchen, they would do gardening. But again, if it's winter, you're not doing any gardening. So the emotional weight of the hospital and tragedy, I'm sure, was very, very heavy. Unlike tropical Kalaupapa, where there's lots of sun and it's more encouraged to spend time outside and do all these things, tragedy's setting was often described as very bleak. You've got the gray Atlantic skies, you've got cold winds off the Gulf of St. Lawrence, long winters with limited visitors because nobody wants to go out in the snow. You can't leave the hospital and nobody wants to make the trek to the hospital to see you.
Yeah.
So a lot of patients were stuck there for decades with no one really giving a shit, and lots of them died there and were just buried nearby. We talked about how Gerhard Hansen identified the bacterium that caused it in 1873. So by the 20th century, the treatments became more effective. There were way fewer new cases appearing in Canada, and the hospital gradually shifted focus. The lazaretto officially closed in Tracadie in 1965. Again, really not that long ago.
There's also one in Greece. Unrelated.
If we look at sort of the eerie and like lesser known details in the history of the hospital itself, weirdly enough, I find that the East Coast has a lot of like fire history. So the original lazaretto building burned down in 1920 and was rebuilt. So even the site that it's on now, there are quite literally layers of different history. Locals have told lots of stories of lights being seen in windows after hours, of footsteps being heard in empty corridors, and of cold spots appearing near former ward areas. Today, in modern day, the site houses the Historical Museum of Tracadie, which serves to preserve the story of the Lazaretto, which is really interesting because I'd not once ever seen it mentioned.
I hadn't either.
No. So as much as they talk about preserving, I think...
And we both lived in New Brunswick for many years.
Over half of our lives.
Yeah.
But again, I want to point out, as with Kalaupapa, former patients are still alive. Like, it's not centuries ago. These patients who experienced the stigma and the discrimination that came out of a situation like this and were forced to isolate and be in this situation, they discourage that idea of ghost sensationalism, and they're placing an emphasis on the dignity and the remembrance of the tragedy of Tracadie. There was also, I'll briefly mention, another short-lived leper colony on Sheldrake Island, also in New Brunswick, also in the 1840s.
Yeah, if you didn't mention it, I would.
Perfect. Unfortunately, conditions at Sheldrake Island were reportedly so poor and remote because that one was an island. That one was even more secluded. So now imagine that. You are separated from...
Think Alcatraz.
Exactly.
But worse weather.
Alcatraz, but snow.
Yeah.
But there's 20 feet of snow. I don't mean to laugh. It was traumatizing to think about the winters that we experienced, let alone in these circumstances.
There was snowdrifts taller than me.
Yeah. It was literally like over...
I mean, I'm not that tall, but
but
still scary.
There was literally snowdrifts over the doors. Like, we'd have to shovel our way out. I missed 2 weeks of school one year because no one could leave their house. But again, conditions at Sheldrake Island were reportedly so poor and so remote that it was quickly abandoned in favor of Tracadie. I feel like that only adds to the sort of darker reputation of Tracadie.
Both bad.
But that's the thing, both bad. Obviously, leprosy in Canada was never as widespread compared to Europe or compared to tropical regions, but the stigma was still powerful. Isolation was about fear. It wasn't about science. It wasn't about medical studies that were proving that isolation was beneficial. It was fear and stigma. And these communities were struggling with balancing the idea of compassion and public safety. And many patients experienced a lifelong separation from family. Even, again, like Kalaupapa, even when the isolation was done and the government said, no, you can come out, you're good. These people were at a point where they were like, why would I go back?
What's the point?
Yeah, you abandoned me.
And also, you're not going to welcome them back with open arms.
Exactly. The last one that I want to talk about that I think is important to mention is on the west coast of Canada, because that's where I am now. Obviously not in this exact place, but...
You better not be.
But I think it's important, as much as I shit on New Brunswick, it wasn't just New Brunswick. These things were everywhere, and they went quite literally from coast to coast. So, DRC Island in British Columbia is often considered to be Canada's most isolated leper colony. And
also, not Darcy.
No, DRC.
DRC.
Yeah.
What an odd name.
That's out west. There's a place just outside of Calgary called DRC Ranch.
Can we just say Darcy? Hey, Mr. Darcy.
You would think, but no.
Right.
Not to laugh, because this is not the time to be laughing, but that does make me laugh.
Sorry,
but the story...
Leper colony.
The story of DRC Island is also...
It's very sad.
Quieter, it's harsher, and socially, culturally, coming from a Canadian standpoint, it's a lot more unsettling than Tracadie's. The Acadians went through a lot. I will not diminish that. The history of the Acadian culture is tumultuous, and they have experienced a lot of negative things. But the idea of what went on at DRC Island, there's a lot more stigma behind it. So DRC Island sits off the coast, sort of near Victoria, British Columbia. But in the late 1800s, it may as well have been the edge of the world. Like it was the middle of nowhere. So by the late 19th century, we're talking like 1890, 1891, a small number of people in British Columbia were diagnosed with leprosy. And these individuals were primarily Chinese immigrants. Mm-hmm. The history of Asian immigrants in Canada is horrific. And there's this is another thing where there is no way of sugarcoating it. There's no way around it. Particularly in BC. I think Vancouver area but British Columbia in general probably have the highest concentration of Asian immigrants in the country. And
I think that's true.
Their experiences are just, there's no way to say it other than horrendous.
Yeah.
There's a wide history of Japanese internment camps. So that's the thing. We like to shit on the Nazis for making these camps and segregating the Jews the way they did. And obviously they deserve...
And Trump making these
Yes.
camps.
But obviously these things deserve to be shit on. We're shitting on them for a reason. But Canada is really good at forgetting that we did the same thing to these Asian immigrants.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I even learned about in school. I learned about it independently as an adult.
Oh yeah.
Which is
There's
horrific.
things for this podcast that I had researched that I'm like, why didn't anyone tell me about
Absolutely
this?
horrific, because...
Why am I discovering this in my 20s?
Because as much as Canada likes to consider itself a cultural mosaic...
Our free public healthcare sucks. Or Freudian slip, that's true too. Our free public school system sucks.
Yes.
Whoops.
But we're bringing this up, and like this isn't a complete tangent, because people being diagnosed with leprosy were primarily Chinese immigrants, and at the time, around 1891, anti-Chinese racism was widespread. These people were coming and being tormented, and the public fear of contagion, just like it was in any other case with leprosy, was high. And the federal government went ahead and chose isolation over treatment, especially for these immigrants, because they barely treated them as humans, let alone wanting to give them treatment for something that they already thought was
Systemic
untreatable.
racism.
So in
Systemic
1891,
racism.
groups of Chinese men were forcibly sent to DRC Island.
Right.
Unlike Hawaii's Kalaupapa, there were no doctors living on site. There were no permanent nurses. There were minimal supplies. There was no infrastructure. And it was more abandonment than anything else. So
That's so racist.
So when the first men arrived, when the first group arrived, they were left with a small wooden shack, one shack. Supplies were delivered irregularly when people felt like it by boat. Food and medicine were insufficient, and there was no running water. So as much as East Coast winters are shitty, West Coast winters are still shit. We're still in Canada. It's still winter. Just because there's not as much snow, things are wet.
It's still cold.
Things are wet. They're cold.
Wet.
They're dreary. Winters were damp. They were cold. And the isolation at that point, especially when the waters are shitty in the winter and the boats are coming less and less frequent, isolation was basically total.
How do you even stay warm?
You don't.
Like, good luck starting a fire with all that wet wood.
Well, that's the thing, too. So there was a lighthouse keeper from nearby islands that would reportedly deliver supplies, but he wouldn't stay. He wouldn't check on them. So over the years, around a dozen men were confined at DRC Island, and most of them died on the island. They were given no opportunity to thrive, let alone survive. So several of the men ended up being buried in unmarked graves on the island, and they had nothing. So the markers were basic and they deteriorated quickly. So some of the burial locations were lost over time, And for decades, there was little to no formal acknowledgement that existed. Which, again, is a running pattern with Canada. Is just forgetting to mention, like, calling out other countries on all their shit and forgetting.
That's why we're such a proud country.
Exactly, because
we don't educate our citizens of all of our wrongdoings.
Yeah, we conveniently forget to mention all of the horrible things that we've done as well.
Yeah.
Today, there's a memorial that honors those who were sent there, that recognizes both the medical history and the racial injustice involved. But again, if you're not looking up things like this, you're not going to find the memorial. It wouldn't be until 1906 where public criticism really started to hit of the harsh conditions on the island, and patients were moved to a better equipped facility at BIRTHDAY Island, and DRC Island was abandoned. And there again, it later was overshadowed. It became a provincial marine park. It's quiet, it's forested, largely unvisited except by boaters and visitors of that nature. Again, people are not being brought there to learn about what happened. It's forgotten. So I thought it was very, very important to mention that and bring notice to it. It's no surprise, especially given the heavy energy surrounding a topic like this, an idea like this. There's a lot of eerie details and local lore that comes out of DRC Island. It's remote, it's heavily wooded, it's underdeveloped, and it's associated with nothing but neglect and death. So it sure has accumulated its own ghost stories.
Yeah.
So boaters who have gone to this marine park have described having a heavy and oppressive feeling when landed. Which I do not doubt that if there are still spirits on that land, they are pissed off and they have absolutely every right to be.
Yeah.
There's reports of there being just a sudden silence in the trees. No sounds of nature, no sounds of water, just silence. Which again comes with the heaviness. And as has been kind of a running theme when we talk about spooky things lately, it's just that sensation of being watched, particularly near the old the old foundation remains for the shack. Some say that the wind through the trees sounds like whispering, especially near the shack site. And there's also stories of flickering lantern-like lights being seen from the water, particularly around dusk, and of shapes disappearing between trees when approached. Obviously, people aren't spending a huge amount of time on this island. There's no documented paranormal evidence, but if you look at the combination of isolation, injustice, and unmarked graves being literally anywhere, the island has a strong energy and a really powerful atmosphere. So, as much as I would like to end this on a positive note,
No.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that DRC Island and these leper colonies in general have a really, really dark history to them. And DRC Island in particular stands as a reminder not only of medical misunderstandings, but of racial discrimination against Chinese Canadians, and how these isolation policies could exceed what is socially and culturally considered safekeeping and just become neglect. And
You're so right.
unfortunately, again, unlike a lot of the larger colonies that were able to at least become communities and lean on each other and grow together, DRC never developed into a town. These men were never given the opportunity, like I said, to thrive, let alone to survive. So DRC Island was a holding place for them to die. It's a handful of men that were left on a wooden island with no support. And it breaks my heart. So I wanted to mention it. So all that to say, I will kind of get into our conclusions. To no one's surprise, this episode was a lot of me talking, and this is a long episode. But again, I think it's my birthday. I'll talk if I want to. And I think it's really important that in a discussion like this, we don't sugarcoat it. Details aren't left out. And the acknowledgement, again, that as interesting as these stories are, and as much as this is a paranormal podcast, and I'm sure there are a lot more spiritual and paranormal connections that could be made to a story like these, I think that the genuine history itself speaks enough. And I think the resilience of these individuals and the shit that they went through is haunting enough. I don't think...
For once, we agree.
Well, I think this is one of those circumstances, and we've said it a million times in the show. We say it in our intro in every show. I don't think the scariest thing is ghosts and cryptids and monsters. I think the scariest thing is people. And when we let fear dictate what we're doing, particularly when fear is running the people in power, this is what happens. And that's it's an ultimate level of control and neglect and disrespect to these groups of individuals, particularly who need help. These people, sure, we didn't know what was causing leprosy. We didn't...
It's a reason, not an excuse.
Exactly. And I think it should be acknowledged that, yeah, of course, these untreated cases, particularly when it was at its earliest stages, I'm sure it was scary. I'm sure the looks of these people who were disfigured were very unsettling, especially when it was not understood. But I think it's important to acknowledge now that we do know what causes it. We do know how to help. We don't have to continue calling, like, as if a leper is a cryptid. These are individuals with a disease. It's not... We cannot...
That they can't help.
Exactly. We cannot separate... Like, we cannot... Or the opposite. We should be separating this idea of a disease and an individual. They're an individual with a disease. They're not a dead version of themselves to be shipped off and exiled. And yeah, again, as much as this is a topic that interests me and I'm very happy to get to talk about it on my birthday, I think it's also a very relevant thing to mention in the world right now, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Thanks. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, I don't know. I think you said it all way more articulately than I would. I apologize. My allergy pill kicked in.
Nice.
I'm on a different planet. I'm listening and I'm locked in.
You have allergies?
I forgot.
We gotta send you to an island.
I'm allergic to the outside, so you gotta send me underground.
Fuck. It's like Divergent.
But yeah, I forgot I was recording. So
Valid.
That's how into it I was when you were telling me. My final concluding statement, I empathize with everyone who was there. I obviously wish it didn't happen, but I can't go back in time and change it. But I do hope we can learn from it for the future and not repeat history, because boy, do we love to do that. And hopefully we are a little bit smarter as a society now. But you never know, with
Doubtful.
who's in charge lately.
Yeah, doubtful, but we'll see.
But I'm naively optimistic. So.
There we go. We're changing the name of the podcast to Naively Optimistic.
That's my whole life.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us for my birthday special. I know this was a long one. I'm very excited about it.
Good. Happy 27th
Oh my
birthday.
god. That's disgusting. Oh, that really threw me for a loop. Hate that. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for listening. If you would like to share your perspective on this episode, if you have anything to add, if you want to add some suggestions to Jamie's 26-page document for further episodes, please feel free to get in touch with us at our email, which is creepsandcoffee@gmail.com. You can check out our Instagram and our Twitter, which I have said a million times, but I swear to God, I am going to revamp and get better at updating and all the things there, at Creeps and Coffee. If you would like to help support the show and potentially get some behind the scenes details, I feel like it's been so long since I've done this. I'm going to start that again. If you would like to help support the show and give me a little birthday present and get access to some behind the scenes looks at how Creeps and Coffee runs, what we're up to in our daily lives, and get access to an extra special bonus episode every month, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/creepsandcoffee. We have a paid tier, but we also have a free tier if you would like to just join us and hang out. We would love to have you.
Please.
And all that to say, we love you, we appreciate you, and we hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Boom.
Bye. Love you.
Bye, love you.
Creeps and Coffee is produced and edited by us, Kate and Jane.
Our theme music is Stuck in a Hole by Dated.
For more information on where to find them, check out the link in our show notes. And to connect with us, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Creeps and Coffee.